It is the early days of August, 1631. Field Marshal Gustaf Horn stands by his wife Christina's side as she battles the plague. While Christina was fighting the devastating odds against her survival, Horn received an urgent order from King Gustavus Adolphus to join his forces with the main army. It was with a heavy heart he left Christina, knowing it was likely the last time they would ever see each other. A month later, Horn would play a pivotal role at the Battle of Breitenfeld, commanding the left wing in what became a monumental victory for the king. This triumph not only altered the trajectory of Swedish history, but arguably reshaped the course of European history itself. While the victory was largely attributed to the king's leadership, it also showcased the brilliance of Horn and three other future Swedish field marshals, Johan Barnér, Lennart Torstensson, and Åke Henriksson Tott. Following the king's death, a year later, Horn, Barnér, and Torstensson carried the war effort forward with remarkable success, putting Sweden on a path to reach its greatest territorial extent. Military historian Jan von Konow, in his evaluation of all Swedish field marshals, placed these three at the top of his rankings. Of the six he rated highest, two others, Rensköld and Stenbock, distinguished themselves in the massive victory at the Battle of Naval in 1700. But if he had six people in his top ranking, who was then the sixth? In the first episode of our series on Swedish field marshals, we will focus on that sixth man, Carl Gustaf Wrangel. Too young to fight at Breitenfeld, Wrangel was nonetheless present on the foggy battlefield of Lützen a year later, when Gustavus Adolphus' life came to an end. Wrangel's career would turn out to be an epic one. Among many things, he would later command the entire war effort in Germany, secure one of Sweden's greatest naval victories at the Battle of Fehmarn, and as Charles X Gustav's principal general, lead an army across a frozen sea to achieve one of the most remarkable and consequential victories in the nation's history. Born in 1613 to Hermann Wrangel and Margareta Grip, Carl Gustaf entered the world at a pivotal time. That same year, the young, newly crowned Gustavus Adolphus signed the Treaty of Knäred, which ended the Kalmar War. The war, started by Gustavus' father, Charles IX, had been a disaster, and the peace treaty now required Sweden to pay an enormous sum of money to Denmark. Despite this, or maybe as some historians have argued, because of this, Carl Gustaf's early life saw Sweden transform under the leadership of the new king and his chancellor, Axel Oxenstierna, from a medieval society to a modern, flourishing nation ready to compete on a European scale. The king reorganized the army according to his own ideas and ideas influenced from the war in the Netherlands, and made it ready to go on the offensive against his cousin, Sigismund in Poland, a war in which Carl Gustaf's father served with distinction. At 14, Carl Gustaf's father, Hermann Wrangel, decided it was time for his son to learn the art of warfare. Carl Gustaf followed his father's campaigns for years and was with him in Poland in February 1629, when Hermann Wrangel won a great victory against the Poles at the Battle of Gorsno. In 1630, Wrangel set off on an educational trip to the Netherlands, where he studied shipbuilding and navigation. He did not know it at the time, but the skills he acquired there would, 14 years later, pay off with him as an army general, managing to secure victory at the naval Battle of Fehmarn. Wrangel then spent some time in France, a country whose culture he admired greatly, before returning home to serve as a gentleman of the chamber at the court of Gustavus Adolphus. It was here that Wrangel also took his first step into military life by joining the army as a cornet in the Royal Guard regiment. From there, Wrangel followed the army to the war in Europe. He arrived in 1632, missing the Battle of Breitenfeld, which had taken place the previous autumn. By April of that year, the king had chased the Imperial Field Marshal Tilly into Bavaria. Here, Tilly decided to turn and make a stand at River Lech. The king now faced a difficult situation, with a dug-in imperial army and a major river to cross. Gustavus now ordered Lennart Torstensson to set up artillery positions to fire on the imperial forces from across the river, while he himself led troops in a distraction to convince Tilly that he was attempting to cross. While the Imperials were focusing on the king, Swedish engineers constructed a pontoon bridge allowing the Finnish Hakkapeliitta cavalry to cross and establish a bridgehead on the other side. Among the first cavalrymen to cross was the now 18-year-old Carl Gustaf Wrangel, who rode with the Finnish units. This force managed to create a bridgehead that successfully repelled all imperial countercharges. While all this was going on, the king dispatched a large cavalry detachment about 10 kilometers south to cross the river at the ford. This detachment charged the enemy flank, and when Tilly himself was mortally wounded and carried off the field, the Imperials' morale collapsed and their army fled. The victory allowed the Swedish army to capture Munich on May 17th. However, this was as far south as Gustavus Adolphus would get. A new imperial army under Wallenstein had already formed, threatening to cut off the Swedes from their supply base in northern Germany. During the Swedish retreat north, the king tried and failed to defeat Wallenstein in the large battle of Alte Veste in September, a battle which also saw the newly named General Lennart Torstensson captured. However, a lack of supplies meant the Imperials could not capitalize on what in the end was only a minor victory for them. 2 months later, Gustavus managed to catch up again with Wallenstein outside Leipzig, at the small village of Lützen. Wallenstein thought the fighting season to be over, and the Imperial forces had divided, with Pappenheim leaving for Hull with a large contingent, giving the Swedish army a tactical advantage. Wrangel fought hard in what was his first large, pitched battle. The fighting was chaotic and took place under a heavy fog. In the midst of the melee, rumors began to swirl that the king was missing. In the end, steady leadership from General Bernhard of Saxe-Weimar secured a Swedish victory when the Imperials were forced to abandon the field. False rumors and missing leaders were common on battlefields of the time, but this time it was tragically true. The king had gotten lost on the field, ended up surrounded by Imperials, and was killed. With the death of Gustavus Adolphus, the army was left bereft of its sublime and beloved leader. Thankfully for the Swedish side, the country at this time had more competent leaders than it perhaps had had at any other time in history. The Chancellor, Axel Oxenstierna, was a political strategist of the highest order, and he managed to keep the Protestant German states together under Swedish leadership in the Heilbronn League, while generals such as Horn, Banér and Torstensson kept the military leadership intact. For Wrangel, this was a period of development and rise among the ranks. His father Hermann was still active as a field marshal, who in 1632 had been named governor of the temporarily occupied province of Prussia. Hermann Wrangel had always been controversial though, and often got into fights with other generals. At one point he had gotten into a fight with Åke Tott that led to them challenging each other to a duel. The duel was only stopped in the last minute when Gustavus Adolphus himself arrived at the scene and declared that he would watch, and that if any of them survived, that person would immediately be sentenced to death for breaking the law. Another person the older Wrangel often argued with was Johan Banér. With the Treaty of Sturmstorf in 1635, Sweden agreed to return Prussia to Poland-Lithuania. Wrangel then moved his forces from Prussia to Pomerania, where he was to coordinate militarily with Banér. The elder Wrangel, though, did neither like nor understand Banér's strategy, and tensions between the two field marshals were constant. In the meantime, the younger Wrangel had made a quick career, where he had made lieutenant colonel in 1633, and in 1635 he had joined Banér's army, and were noted for his actions at a minor engagement at Liederhausen. After the Swedish heavy loss at the Battle of Nördlingen in 1634, where Gustav Horn had been captured, overall military command in Germany now fell to Banér. He rebuilt the army and managed to win a morale-boosting victory at the Battle of Wittstock in 1636. Banér then took his forces on the offensive and laid siege to Leipzig, but this turned out to be a step too far. The Imperial forces had a heavy numerical advantage and managed to surround Banér's army. The only way out was for the Swedish forces to cross into Poland, an action that might reignite the old war. Wrangel, who at this time had been made a colonel at the Life Regiment of Horse, was with the army when it was surrounded. Banér decided to take the route through Poland. The army supplies were gathered in Torgau and loaded onto wagons and set off with the wives and children towards the Polish border. Banér made sure to be very open about his orders that the army should take the route through Poland. Then, when he thought he had waited long enough, Banér ordered the supply wagons to turn around, and the army marched in the opposite direction, towards Pomerania, where the elder Wrangel and his forces waited. This ruse worked, and Banér had saved his army at the last moment, or as he himself put it, "They had me in the bag, but they forgot to tie it shut." Although the return march through enemy lines had been very costly, Wrangel was yet again noted for his brave fighting. The bad relationship between the elder Wrangel and Barnier now came to a boiling point, and Wrangel had to choose between submitting to the overall command of Barnier or give up command entirely. Wrangel chose the latter and returned to Sweden. For the younger Wrangel, this meant getting on the bad side of Barnier, who would from now on do everything he could to stop his career advancing. But his father's absence would ironically instead prove to be a career ladder. With the elder Wrangel's absence from Germany, it left a spot for the young Wrangel, who through pressure from Oxenstierna was named Major General, despite heavy protest from Barnier. He was now, at 24 years old, the army's youngest general, and when Barnier died in May of 1641, Wrangel was one of 3 generals that took charge while waiting for Lennart Torstensson to arrive and take overall command. But here we will leave Wrangel for now. In the next episode, we will see him take independent command, rescue the navy, and win a glorious victory on the seas. We will follow him to Poland and the 3-day Battle of Warsaw, and we will join him as he leads his men out onto the ice that fateful day in January of 1658, when the army crossed the sea and Swedish history changed forever.